Everybody. As you can hear, I am battling the October cold. Hopefully we will get through this without too many frogs or sneezes in my voice. As always, at the beginning of Friday, if you are brand new to us, it's important to us that we just take a moment to recognize where we are. Obviously working virtually, both Craig and I are based in Calgary, traditionally known as McIntyre, which means the meeting of two rivers, the Elbow River and the Bow River. The building, if you are watching your screen, that you can see there is Heritage Hall. And that's what it looks like at the moment. The colors are gorgeous. I think we probably have about another 10 days, depends how soon that white stuff comes. SAIT is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda of Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney. We're situated, as I said earlier, in an area of the Blackfoot that traditionally was known as McIntyre, and now we refer to it as Calgary. And it's also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. Wherever you are, assumingly in Canada, but we always have a few from far away from Canada too. So if you are joining us from a long way away, do let us know in the chat. That's always fun to see. But thank you just for taking a moment to pause today. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Jenny. And yeah, I think last time in, we had a couple folks from Nigeria join us, of all places. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to see where we've reached to. But today is maybe a little bit of a different topic for us when we talk about engagement surveys. But let me just kind of preface this from the standpoint of we're not here to talk about how to design, how to implement, how to run an engagement survey. We're here today to kind of talk about the importance of engagement, why you might want to do engagement surveys, why organizations do them, what's good, what's bad, what we like, what we don't like, what you do with the stuff once you got it. So I think the important thing here, perhaps, so Jenny, before we really get into it, is what is engagement? What is it we're trying to measure through an engagement survey?
It's a really good question. And there's lots of different answers. In fact, it's truly the starting point. Engagement traditionally is the extent to which your employees thrive, and how motivated they are to do their best for their team, for the organization. If you Google engagement, you'll get 101 different definitions, and everybody has their own version. And I think that's one of the things that pops up with this straight away, is that an engagement survey that works here probably won't work there, probably won't work there. And the part that I would ask the question is, before you even begin on this process, do you know what engages your employees? Because what engages me is going to be very different than what engages somebody else on our team and somebody else on our team. And what are you trying to measure within that survey piece? There you go.
Yeah, and I think probably, if you're in a larger organization, your engagement survey is coming from, quote unquote, coming from above, right? And you're looking organizationally, you're trying to understand a moment in time of your organization as to what's going on. So it might not necessarily be specific to your team. No. I think there's a bit of a generic approach to some of these engagement surveys, which tries to, look at teams versus teams, not versus, but you know what I mean, where you're trying to just see if there's areas within an organization that perhaps are showing different signs than the other areas of the organization, if you want to put it that way. Could be positive, could be negative. But I think if you're a leader really trying to understand if folks on your team are engaged, as Jenny's talking about, are you committed and, willing to give that discretionary effort? That's a one-on-one conversation, really, as a leader, trying to understand that for your specific team. I think this broader piece, and that's perhaps one of the places we can start, is, why do you do this? And I think it's so an organization can get that aggregate view of the company to understand to some degree where the company is at in terms of its overall engagement.
Yes.
And
And yes, I think the key, well, a couple of key things about what you just said there, a moment in time. So here's one of my confusions with it, in that there's a lot of work that goes into this. Like, this is another one, the intention is good, and some people are working really, really hard to make this as useful as it can be. Like, I don't want to knock that. But then the engagement survey goes out, and then it's eons until the results come out. And when you get the results, so you're looking in the rearview mirror to a moment in time at an average result of what exactly? And so we end up with that lag, and lots of people have moved on by the time we get to that time when the results come out. And there's a little bit in there too as to how do we answer an engagement survey. Like, if I have a really bad day or somebody's annoyed me, I'm going to answer that differently than I might do a week later. So we have to bear that in mind too. And then there's another thing you said that's quite funny. And as we look across the company, what are we looking for? Oh, that leader came last. Like, you just need to come second to last. Nobody ever remembers that. And so we're back at that. We do love to lean in on the worst results. And I'm not sure that that's actually helpful either. So when we've got this going, I liked what you said. This is a system that the organization might be able to use effectively. And as a leader, maybe you need to be supplementing that. So don't wait for the engagement survey. If you want to engage your people, like
100%, right? If you're waiting for the once a year engagement survey to understand where your team is at,
yeah,
you might have a bit of an issue there.
yeah,
Right.
yes,
I can appreciate where, when you look one level up, two levels up, three levels up, as they're looking down at the organization, of course, they're not going to truly understand what's happening in various places just because they're further away from it.
yes,
right? And so I can understand and appreciate why you want to try and get some understanding globally of how your teams are doing. So, we've highlighted a couple things here, length of time between survey happening and survey results being presented. You as an individual, depending on the survey, and folks, there's dozens upon dozens of engagement surveys out there, right? We've done in my career, I've done Towers Parent, I've done Gallup, I've done others. Gallup had their famous, do you have a best friend at work question? That one always was Q10. Everybody wanted to know who your Q10 was. Who was your best friend at work? Some of these surveys have very interesting questions and different approaches, but ultimately still trying to get to the point of, are folks here working hard? Do they want to be here? Are they happy? And are they willing to give that discretionary effort? Right.
yeah.
So lagging time between results, may not remember what the questions are as you're going through the results with your team. But you, at some point, know that a survey is coming. So I think before we get to the outcomes, the place I wanted to go, we chatted a little bit about this beforehand, Jenny, was, so a survey is coming. How do you set it up with your teams to help make it meaningful? Right? Not to suggest that you're trying to seed the answers or sow the clouds, so to speak. Right? But just thoughts on how do you have a survey coming up. How do you work to make it meaningful?
Yeah, I think there's two keys here. There's an honesty and a transparency that's required. And so one of the things that often wraps people a little bit in knots is this truly anonymous? And so how much can you speak to that? And then the more I think about it, I think one of the opportunities is to really recognize how this is going to work. So this is important to the organization. It theoretically is important to you, and we don't have the questions. So you as a leader, I think I would be screenshotting each of the questions as I took it, and then starting that conversation earlier before I've even got the results. And the other thing that I think pops up within this is as you're looking at the questions and what they're measuring on it, and to your point, there's so many different versions, is there's rarely a surprise. Like I think most people know when something's not quite right or something's missing, or they've literally just let that ball drop. And so as you're seeing the questions and you're filling it in for you, what are you thinking about your team? And then how do you carry on that conversation sooner than those results come out?
Yeah.
Might be a way to help it stay relevant as well.
Yeah, I think to your point, the gap sometimes can be really challenging because you can't remember, what sort of mood you were in, what happened just before you decided to sit down and do this survey. Oh, I just got the 5th email reminding me that the survey has to be done by 3 o'clock on Friday, and it's 2:55 on Friday.
Yeah.
Right. We've all been there, right? It's just like the compliance training. We all click through to the very end to say we've done it. Not that I've ever done that. But so now we've got this. And ultimately what we are talking about here and what we're dealing with is we have now as leaders received feedback, right?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot in the past about how to deliver effective feedback, or feed forward, as you like to call it.
I do.
But you now as a group of leaders, or as a leader of your team, have received feedback from your team. And I think this is really the crux of this conversation is, what do you do with feedback? Right?
Yeah. So really what you've received is sort of an insight, a surface insight. That's your clue. And the question becomes, what are you going to do with the clues that you've got in front of you? And so listening is the only way that we're going to get to the depth of those clues. Now, we're kind of thinking or assuming that a team has an element of environment where we'll talk about this openly. And so, I don't know, one pops up, learning, can you progress your career or something? I don't know an exact question. And you're seeing mid-range in the clues that you've got from this survey. And so what does that mid-range mean? And then there's a conversation to have with your team. I think the danger is, because we're often in a hurry, is as a leader, we're like, oh yeah, no surprise there. I know what's wrong. I'll fix this. And that's not engaging your team in the engagement process. So, it's one that we've used a lot. You are the hippo, highest individually paid person's opinion. And if you come in and say, well, I think we'll do this, everybody's like, okay, well, all right, let's do that. And we'll follow, because we're humans and that's what we do. And so I think the key, first of all, is, okay, I'm surprised at where we ended on this learning one. My understanding was, whatever that might be, let's dig in, let's have a conversation. What are we looking for in terms of progress for a career? And at that point, that's when you're getting deeper understanding, and that's where the work begins. And I think the other thing too is leaders have to be careful. This isn't necessarily all for you to carry on your shoulders. Conversation is a two-way part. So within there, what can I do? What can you do? And how do we change that piece moving forward?
Yeah, I think, you touched on something really important there, and that is, how do you, really two things that kind of come to mind for me is, how do you communicate the results back to your team in a really transparent and actionable way? And for anybody who's done any modern engagement surveys, I think a lot of these companies do a very good job, or a lot of HR departments, employee services departments do a really good job of providing you with the tools to present and share the results, right? To the point, that's just a slide deck or handouts, right? Here's data, here's information. But, so one, how do you set the stage to really communicate that in a transparent way? And how do you then encourage and kind of facilitate that conversation so your team feels that they can help co-create the solutions?
You use the keywords there, it's setting the stage. And so when we set the stage, we're back to that sort of that honesty and that transparency. Like this is the information that I have. And I think whether it's shiny or not cool, display the information. Like if we're on a team, it's only fair that we all know how, like what we've done in there, how we've scored in there. And so talking about that and giving them as much information as you have. And then I think the key with the conversation actually is don't rush it. And the problem with this is because it's potentially 6 months later, we just want to share it and move on because we've all moved on, which is why I think that cadence of conversation early is important, because we've already done some digging before the results come out. So if we've done that, then it might be a case of, okay, we actually don't have any surprises in here. Looks to me like it's matching up with where our conversations have gone, and you're already working on those solutions. How do you involve your team in those solutions? Literally involve them in the solutions, but that's the part where we have to pause and set them up for success. So your productive response to their solutions is going to be everything. And that's the conversation, is how do we make that viable and aligned? Like that's the key here too. We've still got the day job, we've still got the performance piece. So just because Jenny gets engaged by, I don't know, playing over here doesn't mean that she can do that all of the time.
All of the time. That's the key thing. Like we've talked about this before too, where Marcus Buckingham talks about, pulling on those red threads or those red strings that he calls, you don't have to be, the king of focus on your strengths even says you don't have to be focused on your strengths 100% of the time.
20. Yeah,
right.
That's it. Which is staggering to me. I can't imagine that, but brilliant,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So Henry Stewart, who runs Happy in the UK, he's the CEO of that company, and they changed their engagement surveys to just 4 questions. And their 4 questions are: how much joy do you find at work? How trusted do you feel? Does your leader have your best interests at heart? And does the organization have your best interests at heart?
Ooh, those are good.
Now, with just those 4 questions, like a leader at any time, you could be asking them in every one-on-one. And so then the engagement, becomes real. We know where we're shifting, we know what we're doing. And I think one of the disconnects is when we get these random 10, 12 questions that's been made up from somebody else who doesn't understand. And then we have trouble connecting that because that's not what our team is about, perhaps. And the other thing we need to bear in mind too, some engagement is unhealthy. And being over-engaged isn't necessarily a brilliant thing all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it is fascinating. We've got some questions that have built up here, so I want to get to them. What happens if you do a survey or 2 and present findings to senior leaders and they dismiss the negative results as being one-offs or not representing the company, and so don't feel the need to address them?
It is one of the problems. Like, okay, where are the outliers? Who are the outliers? And if you know differently, then is it actually worth presenting the results or presenting what you know to be different? Like, I think it's difficult. Depends on the company, it depends on the survey, and it depends what they're dismissing. Like, there's a lot to be said for focusing on where we're getting it right. So it depends what that part is that's being ignored. If that's dangerous or toxic or whatever that part might be, then you're telling the story from your perspective. And at that point, I think you need to make sure that you're finding someone who will hear you. That might be the way.
Yeah. This is very similar to a conversation that we have most weeks around whatever topic we're talking about. If my leader or leaders don't believe in it or don't follow it, how do I manage up? All right. The managing up conversation is one I find we frequently encounter here. And I think, to your point, you have to keep doing your best to present it. share the insight as, being truthful and real and data-based and all of that. Find different ways. If you're presenting in the same way, the same information over and over and nothing is happening, find a different way. And the ultimate piece down the road there is if you've exhausted all that and nothing's changing, well, then you have a decision to make as to whether it's truly important to keep carrying forward or to just let it pass. Right?
I think maybe in there too is that bit that we were just saying. Your senior leaders are working with Surface Insights too. And if you have a different story based on your investigation, you've trying to figure out these clues, then that's worth sharing. And I'd be interested in at this point, what are your actionable steps if that's your team that particular score is affecting, and maybe sharing them.
Yeah, exactly. And just because you're not seeing interest above you in addressing the negative results, if there is a way for you to try and move that forward with your team or teams, why not?
Yes. Yeah.
Unless, lack of interest is very different than being told don't do that.
Yes.
Right. And so, some other questions here. We encourage our staff to complete the survey to let their voices be heard. While we tell them it is not mandatory to complete, we get pressure from senior leadership to get higher and higher response rates. This turns into us going to staff and encourage them more, which may come across as simply making them do it. So what's more important, getting a higher response rate or getting feedback from staff that genuinely want to do the survey?
In the opinion of us, I think a lot of employees see this as a tired process. I think the intention was good. I think what we've seen over time is survey results fixing at a surface level. We pretend to do something about it, and then we run a survey again. And by the time we run the survey again, nobody's really clear on the intention or whatever else is going on. So I would encourage employees to fill it in whilst it's still being used as a data point. It's a little bit like performance management systems. It is a system that we have to work with. But what I would really encourage is the cadence of conversation at a team level. And that's back to, if you want to engage your people, literally do that, engage your people. And I think that engagement conversation on that cadence, what we want to remember is that skip level piece. And so, not just to your direct team, but to the team below. We walk around with these signs on us that just says, for goodness sake, just see me, hear me, and value me. And that's where engagement comes from. That's where discretionary effort comes from. If I feel valued, I will give more. And to me, if that's our aim, is to push engagement and push satisfaction, you can't push engagement by an engagement survey, but you can by valuing your people and working within that. So I think the work is on the leader level with the team, and I think you can create a beautiful culture with that kind of focus. And then I think the system is going to carry on. And the part that we have to be careful of is what are we fixing and why and how? That's the conversation that's been using, because it depends on what level it happens at.
Yeah. And you lead in nicely to the next two questions I'm going to put to you. Is one, how do you know you're removing engagement without doing another survey? Quite often companies want quarterly proof of results. So how do you know engagement's improving without doing a survey?
I really think in our heart of hearts, we know. When you look at the performance of your people and literally how happy are they when they come to work? What happens in your meetings? Like if you're running a team meeting and you're online and you know full well everybody's looking at their other screen doing email and Teams and whatever else, and they're not engaging here, well, you've lost engagement in that meeting. And so what are you going to do about that? And how are you going to set that meeting up to be different? And the same when we meet face to face. And when you're in conversation, is there a vibrancy to the conversation, or is that person tired and burnt out? Who's over capacity, who's not? What are we doing about that? I think it's the real human piece and paying attention. And I think you can ask the question, how engaged do you feel? I'm not, I don't like this. I'm doing something that I don't like to do. Okay, what do you love to do? Back to Marcus Buckingham. That's the way he puts those questions. I can see all the things about the 4 questions. There's various versions. I'll put a load on a slide in the resources that come afterwards. There'll be more than the one that I gave to you earlier. But Marcus Buckingham's 4 questions is, what do you love? What do you loathe? What are you looking forward to? And how can I help you? Or something along those lines. Yeah. And again, you know, somebody, what do you love doing? And I'm suddenly giving you all of this. Okay, there's a person who's fairly engaged. Jenny, what do you love doing? And there's dead silence. All right, we've got a bigger conversation to have.
Yeah. Next question. Next 2 questions are really kind of the same question. So, is there an effective way to communicate with employees where an issue has been raised in an engagement survey that the company simply just does not have the ability, capacity, or resources to address, but wants to acknowledge and honor the concern as valid? So that's one question. The next question kind of follows along with this. We have an engagement committee made up of employees across our department. They view the survey results and make recommendations to leadership. Sometimes the recommendations, while valid, aren't feasible, usually due to budget constraints. How do you keep staff engaged when leadership can't action what they want and or need? So you're getting feedback in your engagement survey. Real constraints exist that don't allow you to action some of it.
I just want to make note of that engagement committee that's not just senior leaders. I think that's genius, because that sounds to me like that's a vertical one, and having lots of different opinions, versions, perspectives on those kind of cool. What do you do when the constraints are there? This is where the transparency comes in, and owning it. And so if you've an SVP reporting town hall, whatever, and they're reporting on it, I think it's owning that, and it's, you know, we recognize this, and what we can do about it at the moment is very limited. Like, I think, you know, when we know things like that, we're more likely to pull into that ownership and that piece. And then, you know, for the leaders underneath there, okay, you heard we're constrained, but what can we do as a team? Like, how do we feel about this? And you can go downward spiral conversation in there and blame whoever for there not being enough budget and make excuses and deny it. But downward spiral conversations don't go anywhere. So as a team, what do we need to own? How does that sit for us? What are we looking at? And what can we do? And it's amazing where we can go to if we simply start with sentences like we can if, and we start to think outside the box. And we're getting quite good at that. That's that innovative, creative thinking piece. But as a team, you have to make the time to have that conversation. And we're back to that again. Are you pressing pause to have the conversation?
Yeah. And I think you touched on something there, just triggered a thought for me was, are you looking to completely resolve the issue that's been brought forward? Or are you looking for improvement on it? Right. I can't think of an example right now where, yeah, we don't have budget, so we're just not going to do it at all. But we don't have budget, but maybe we could try this or tweak this, or we could pull some budget from over here. There's trade-offs that you could play, assuming that it is all just financial. Yeah, maybe there's resources, structural pieces, etc. But how can you find, you know, acknowledge it, say we can't do all of this, but we can try this. Find ways to at least try and get some progress on it versus trying to resolve. Because I think that's something else that comes out of these surveys is perhaps a cynicism around, well, we told you everything that needed to be fixed and you can't fix it all. So
why do we bother?
Yeah. Right. Oh, go ahead.
like resources pressed a button for me. It's an interesting one. And we've done something at one point where a team did a calendar cleanse in terms of, let's look at all the meetings that we show up to in the week and how many of us are going to each meeting. And it was fascinating that when you cleanse your calendar, the team that I'm thinking of, there was almost 40 hours of meetings that dropped off their schedule in the week between them. Like, we're only looking at sort of 4 or 5 hours per person, but that's a ton of resource time. And those are the kind of conversations that we're talking about. No, we do not have the budget. We're in a hiring freeze. We cannot get any more people in here. But what can we do? What are we concentrating on? Back to our priority conversation, what work is happening? And what can we drop? What can we lose to make the space for what we need to move forwards? And so I think that's where we sort of bring it down to our team level and look at what we can do within that area.
Absolutely. I was just tongue in cheek thinking there's a big difference between the meetings that we go to and the meetings we show up to, but
yes,
that's a different webinar conversation.
Yeah.
How can you encourage and ask for transparency from senior management to release results based on department? Many employees at our organization feel that there are issues with certain departments where engagement is lower, yet senior management seems to look at the overall results as a whole without wanting to address issues within specific departments.
There's a little piece in there for me that jumps up is, do you know the whole story? Like, let's put some trust and faith in employee services or HR or whoever it is that's behind the work and the analysis that's coming forward. I mean, anybody who holds a senior role here, this is important information that you're hearing. People do want the full picture. And what do we want the full picture for? Because if we feel that there's a lack of engagement in a certain department, what's our aim there? Do we actually need that information? Is somebody working with the leader as to, like, if it's the team that's disengaged, is somebody working with that leader to see, like, what is the environment, what's going on there? We don't know. And an engagement survey is only giving us insights. Remember, we don't know. There may be outliers, there may be a whole thing going on there. So I think sometimes we have to just put a little bit of faith in how it's presented to us. And if the problem with the other team is a disengagement because of the way they work with your team, well, there we are. We're back to team conversations. How are we going to make this work?
Yeah.
Let's get in a room and talk about what does performance for our two teams look like. That's a conversation that we need to be having, which is less about an engagement survey.
Absolutely. A couple other questions that are somewhat related. So what if after receiving this, very somewhat similar to conversation we were having earlier, but what if receiving the results of the survey, senior leadership team doesn't make time to address or have meaningful conversations or make engagement culture a part of the vision strategy? Any suggestions to influence up? I'm going to put this question also with it, is what happens when the employee survey reveals that the performance and or non-performance of the leadership team is the biggest issue the organization is facing? Well, if that I'm just going to tongue in cheek, if that leadership team's the one receiving it, they might not release the results, so you might not know. Anyway.
Yeah. I think culture, I think was one of the things we talked about last week. Yeah, I think it was last week we were talking about it, that it takes about 7% of a team to model the right behaviors to start to change the culture. It was a McKinsey report. And so if there's a disconnect between the survey and what's going on, again, I'm coming back to leaders, like, do the work that you need to do with your team. If the senior leadership is showing a lack of engagement, that's a big red flag to any organization. Yeah. And it happens. And where we're at too with we're still post-COVID, and we've still got a lot of people that are kind of recovering on that social mental side, and things have changed. And we do want to keep an eye for that. But then I think, again, that's on their leadership or on them as a team. And maybe we have to put some trust in them. Maybe we have to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you find your allies as a leader?
Yeah.
If you're kind of in that sandwich position between what you perceive as a disengaged senior leadership group and your team, and you're probably not the only one feeling it or seeing it, regardless of what survey results may or may not show. So how do you find your allies to perhaps become part of the 7% that you speak to, right?
And I think that's a key part too. Like what part can you actively own in there or be responsible for? Because the acronym that springs to mind that'd be helpful to people is blame, excuses, and denial. That's where we typically want to go when we're looking up and like, they don't care, right? Blame, excuses, and denial. Stuck in bed. That's the acronym for that one. And if we want to move forwards, it's about like oars, as in rowing oars, like a rowboat. So ownership, accountability, and responsibility. The only thing that we can control is actually us. So do we play a part in this? Because if the answer is no, like if it's not in your control and you don't play a part, you probably have better things to worry about at your team level. Yeah. And if you do, if there's a part that you can play in there, okay, what are you prepared to do? And how will that look? And then to your point, there's an ally piece, maybe there's a vehicle to have your voice heard. Maybe it's simply, could I offer you my insights from this level? And engage that person.
Yeah.
They can say no, but they probably will say yes.
Absolutely. And then just functionally, Bob, good comment in the chat here is that, depending on the size of your organization, your team or your department, breaking it down into smaller groups may not keep it anonymous.
Yeah.
And so that is perhaps one of the functions of these surveys that you do have to contend with, depending on the sensitivity of the survey, et cetera, and how the data is collected and what comments may be provided in those free-form boxes. You don't necessarily want to keep slicing the pie down to exposing people for their comments that they may believe are anonymous, right? Yeah. Couple more questions that are, I think, very much related that probably take us into our wrap-up, Jenny, and that is, can you share any best practices for following up on engagement surveys? And tied to this is, how do you feel about focus groups after a survey? Meaningful, or what would be an alternative approach to digging deeper?
Okay, so first one, meaningful follow-up, was that the
best practices for following up? And I kind of see these two as the same question. Are focus groups meaningful, or is there an alternative approach to digging deeper into survey results? In essence, you've got the results. How do you dig deeper? How do you keep following up and showing progress on hearing the results?
I think focus groups are interesting. Focus groups are great if they are a widespread in terms of diversity across teams, organizations, whatever, if you're looking at that part. But it's very much like the survey. What are you doing with the information after you've met as a focus group? And how will you run that focus group? Because the more people you've got in there, the less effective round table will be, or whatever. So design the process for the meeting that you're holding and be very, very clear where it is that you want to go to with that focus group. So what's the purpose?
Yeah.
And why are we doing this?
And do you use outside facilitation as well? Running a focus group is a skill.
It is, absolutely. Yes. Yes, it is. And then the follow-up part, I think the key is, like, what are your deliberate moves? 1, 2, maybe 3 of them. Remember, everybody's busy. Everybody's like sort of pushing it all the time. So what are your couple of deliberate moves that you can take and then keep them as part of the conversation? So all too often we see the results, we talk about them, and then there's nothing. and we've all forgotten them because we've just moved on in the busyness. Well, that's not doing it a service. Now, that can be a choice. That absolutely could be a choice, right? Here's what it is. I'm far happier with our cadence of conversation that we have as a team level, and I'm opening the door if we want to come back and talk about this. Sometimes this survey is really useful to us, and there's 2 or 3 things in there, and they're not always the bad things. Don't look just for the red, look for the green as well. And what are our 2, 3 deliberate moves that means we can continue this, or we can start this, or we can stop doing this that will help to it. But really close that loop. So don't just start that and then let it wander off. Make sure you follow up, make sure you close the loop and come back to it continually. And that's on you as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you just said there about being able to focus on the positive pieces in the survey results as well. Human nature is we get these things and we immediately go to, okay, what's skewed to the left-hand side of the distribution curve versus what's on the right-hand side, right? And so, but we've gotten to that point, Jenny, where we need to share a big idea and a couple strategies and a multitude of questions.
Okay, no, actually 3 today. I'm on best behavior is just 3. Promise. Okay, anybody who might be brand new here, when we wrap up, when we finish, it does involve slides. So if you are listening to us, you might want to turn your head to your screen, or Craig always sends out resources afterwards, and the slides are there as a PDF plus extras. I put some resources in there. This time we'll have an extra slide with those 4 questions for one-on-one. I'll put Henry Stewart's in, those are the ones that I mentioned, but we'll put Marcus Buckingham's in there too. Both are really good. So our one big idea, and I think we've talked about this enough, is that don't rely on the engagement survey for engagement. Engagement is all the time and starts long before the survey. So how much are you actually engaging with your people? Don't hide from them, right? They think a lot, they show up. They're basically voting for you by working for you. So honor that and engage them. A couple of ideas that you can take away with you and put into practice. And again, I think these we've talked about as well. There's an act for impact. Kind of sounds cool, but we want to take some action. So be really clear with your expectations. Keep that real-time cadence of conversation going. I did use feedback there, but really feed forward. How are we elevating? How are we moving forward? An engagement survey is classic feedback. It's a rear view mirror. It's an average, and it's back there in a moment of time. So keep the engagement in the real conversation that's going on week by week, and use it as an interesting tool to compare. And then, you know, if you do have challenges, uncover those early. And let's start the conversation on that. You don't have to wait for a survey to tell you that. If you're feeling something, probably worthy of trusting your intuition there. And then the second one, we've actually ended up talking about this quite a bit today too, is watch those downward spiral conversations. So blame, excuses, denial, ignoring it, it's not going to help anybody. And so how will you decide on those actions and then follow up and close that loop, or step into progress or possibilities and really engage your team within there as well. And then, and it is a true story, 3 questions. So the aim is always 3 questions. Sometimes I go beyond that. Last week, I think we had 6, but there are just 3 questions because they're long questions. And so, as we said, PDF will come out with the slide deck. But again, we've pretty much covered these in our conversation today. So I don't think that we need to lean in anymore on them. And I did notice that Craig has put in the chat our leadership.questions@sate.ca. Both of us see that email, and both of us are absolutely up for answering it. So if you do have a question, another question about anything, use the email, and we'd be quite happy to answer those questions.
Absolutely. And thanks, Jenny. Though I will note that there were 4 question marks on the 3 questions page. So I'm just, you know,
thank you.
Just highlighting. That just proves I was engaged in the slide deck.
All right.
Well, there you go. We'll be back, folks, in 3 weeks. I'm going to be on the road the next couple of weeks to go talk about SAIT and other parts of the world. So we are back in 3 weeks for, I think, what'll be another very interesting and relevant conversation. We have Curtis Braun joining us, and we're going to be talking about, thriving with neurodiversity on your team, and as a leader, all the things you may need to consider. Topic we haven't really touched on here before, so I am looking forward to learning as much as everybody else on that one. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend. Jenny, as always, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Feel better. And we will see everybody in a couple of weeks. Take care.
We will do. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.